My name is Taki Suleiman. I'm Chief Exec of the Argyll and Bute Third Sector Interface. That's a terrible name. It means we're here to support community action right across Argyll and Bute. And welcome to the Oban 2024 Hustings. And I'm glad so many of you have come out tonight, and indeed so many of you have asked questions. We're not expecting a fire alarm tonight. There's an exit door there and also an exit door behind. So if the fire alarm does go off, we will head out that way. There are 6 declared candidates for this election. We have invited all 6. We had a message from the Conservative candidate this afternoon. She's with the Prime Minister in Edinburgh and is unable to make the event this evening, but she will be in Helensburgh. So if you want to catch the Conservative candidate sparring with the 3 other candidates here, who will also be in Helensburgh, please join us in Helensburgh for that. So the 2 other candidates are, obviously there's Amanda Hampsey, who's the Scottish Conservative Party candidate. And there's also 2 others. There's Melanie Hurst from Reform UK. And the final one is Tommy McPherson, who's an independent. So the format for the evening, each of the candidates is going to start with a 3-minute presentation. It'll cover their introductions, a little bit about their party, but also cover that kind of question around about third sector and community issues. Now, the sound goes in and out when I move my arms and move my head. I'm going to be asking each of the candidates to speak closely into the microphone so that you can all hear them clearly, and more importantly, the people watching on YouTube can also participate. So we're going to have those 3-minute presentations. Then we're going to move on to questions. They've been pre-submitted. The candidates only got the broad themes. I then used a randomizer. Oh, it's wonderful. And we've picked 7 questions and then the rest of the questions in order. So 6, I think the 6 of you are in the audience tonight. If not, we'll move on to the next one. And we'll also ask a 7th question as somebody from the audience. So just any general question and we will ask you. Rules of debate are as ever. Please be polite and please don't interrupt and allow the candidates to speak. And I've also asked the candidates also to be very polite. I caught the end of the Pride hustings just before this, and they were very polite to each other, so I'm sure that's not going to be required. So thank you for that. And so the theme, so the question is, I'll put it up here. How will a vote for you or your party enable the third social enterprise and community sectors to support communities across Argyll and Bute to thrive at a time of pressure on public spending? So that's the theme for the end of their 3-minute presentation. And so on to the first candidate, and I'm going to ask Brendan O'Hara, who's the Scottish National Party candidate, to speak for 3 minutes, and I will give you a 30-second warning. Brendan.
Thank you, Taki. Thank you to you for coming out on what such a beautiful evening. But I think I would like to thank TSI, not for just organising hustings, but for the work that they do. Because I've always said that if on any given day the voluntary charity and third sector in Argyll and Bute decided to take a day off, Argyll and Bute would grind to a halt. The reliance that we have on the third sector is absolutely immense, and the debt of gratitude that we owe the third sector and the charity and the voluntary sector is absolutely enormous. And I said when I was first elected in 2015 that I wanted my office to be part of that social safety net that exists within Argyll and Bute. That interdependence that we have in order that people don't fall through that net. And we are signpost people, and we are signposted to by those other organisations. And if re-elected, it's something that I will absolutely continue to do, because I think there are tough days ahead, and politics is all about choices. Austerity was a political choice. It was a political choice to make the poor poorer and make the rich richer. Brexit was a choice, but it wasn't our choice. It was someone else's choice. And it's been an unmitigated disaster for Argyll and Bute, economically, culturally, and socially. The funding that we relied on for so much of what we do in Argyll and Bute has gone. And the leader funding that we needed is not going to be replaced by the Levelling Up Fund. But what it also did, it cut us off from that vital supply of labour, those young, ambitious, entrepreneurial Europeans that could come and repopulate Argyll and Bute are no longer there for us. And the idea that we can wait to somehow grow an economy that existing outside of the European Union in order to make this better is utter fantasy. The cost of living crisis was a choice. It was a choice made by Liz Truss and her government, one which crashed the economy and sent your mortgages soaring and your energy and fuel bills skyrocketing. And the answer is independence in Europe. It's independence and a return to the European Union, because it has been the biggest mistake that the United Kingdom, has ever made, because we saw Brexit for what it was, and that's why we overwhelmingly rejected it. What we have now is a Scottish government whose budget is shrinking, and they have to prioritise what they do with that money. And the priority that they've declared, and I absolutely agree with, is to lift children out of poverty. And while mitigating the worst effects of this dreadful Tory government and their decision to put children into poverty through the two-child cap. As I say, tough days are ahead, and I don't think that either of the major parties who are vying to become Prime Minister offer further hope beyond more austerity. And I promise, if re-elected, to continue to do what I can do, to keep those holes in that social safety net as small as they possibly can be, and working together with the sectors across Argyll and Bute for the benefit of the people of Argyll and Bute.
And thanks, Brendan. And can I ask Alan Reid, the Scottish Liberal Democrat Party candidate, to speak for 3 minutes, please?
Okay, thank you, Tacky. My name's Alan Reid, the Liberal Democrat candidate for this new constituency of Argyll, Bute and South Lochaber. I was the Member of Parliament for the former constituency of Argyll and Bute for 14 years, from 2001 to 2015. During that time, I made it a top priority to be out and about around this vast constituency, holding surgeries, talking to people, talking to local groups, and getting a feel for what every part of this vast constituency wanted out of government, whether it be at Westminster, Holyrood, or Kilmorey. I held regular surgeries in all the towns, and every summer I used the summer recess to go around the constituency holding surgeries in all the towns and villages. So I talked to a lot of constituents and was therefore well in tune with what people of this constituency wanted from their elected representatives. And if you re-elect me on the 4th of July, then I would continue in the same vein for the next Parliament. When I was the MP, I met with a lot of voluntary groups and took up issues on their behalf, because I would want to thank Third Sector Interface and all the voluntary groups for all the work, the good work that they do in this constituency. Small charities and the voluntary sector generally are vital for the future of our country. They provide jobs, services, and opportunities for millions of people. And I support a thriving and robust civil society. Liberal Democrats are committed to transferring greater powers and resources away from Westminster and Holyrood to local communities, so that local services are truly local and are accountable to local people. We want to build strong and resilient communities with more powers in the hands of local people. The voluntary sector clearly has an important role to play. The greatest challenge facing us, I think, is undoubtedly climate change. We simply have to stop global warming, or the world will simply become uninhabitable. And again, the local communities have an important role to play here. We have to generate all our electricity from renewables, and I want to see the profits from those renewables back into local communities. I would like to see these generating plants run by local communities, and the profits go back into the local community, not into the hands of the landowners and big multinational companies. If elected, I would be very happy to meet with you to discuss these matters in more detail, as well as local volunteering organisations throughout the constituency. Thank you for organising this tonight. Thank you all for coming, and I look forward to the discussion later on.
Thanks, Alan. Can I ask Hamish Maxwell, the Scottish Labour Party candidate, please, for 3 minutes?
Good evening. Thank you very much for having me. My name's Hamish Maxwell, and I'm delighted to be Scottish Labour's Westminster candidate in the beautiful Argyll, Bute and South Dakar. A bit of background on me, probably lesser known than the former MPs either side of me. I grew up in social housing and put myself through law school by working on building sites, and my experience of social housing gave me a very, very clear sense of community and community action, and also the Conservative Council gave me a taste of austerity before austerity was even a term in common usage. So I stand against austerity, as does my party, and we can talk more about that. I've got a really strong personal connection with the constituency. I used to be an officer in the Royal Navy based at Faslane, and I spent loads of time getting to know the amazing communities in the wider area. And they were actually really, really good for me, because submarining is hard and it can be bad for a person's mental health. And when I come back from sea feeling quite stressed, living somewhere so beautiful with such amazing communities was really good for me, and I owe this place an awful lot, which is one of the reasons that I put myself forward to be the candidate. And then after the Navy, I got a scholarship to an MBA, and now I work in Scottish asset management. Helping to guide me have been my mother, who used to be a teaching assistant, my father, who used to be a journalist, and my wonderful wife, who's an amazing mother and a professional. I want everyone in this constituency to have the opportunity for a better future. That means I want stronger public services, supported by a stronger and growing economy that doesn't leave people behind. I do feel let down by my government in Westminster, but also aspects of my government in Holyrood as well. But I am excited by Labour's opportunity to deliver the change that our country needs. My outlook on the TSI and third sector and volunteering: I recognise that charities, community groups, social enterprises and volunteers help with really, really critical services, whether it's delivering food, bringing people home from hospital, helping families in need, helping communities like the one I grew up in. Throughout my life, I've been involved with volunteering one way or another. At University's Law Society, I was head of charitable outreach in the Navy, not because I thought it looked good, but because my sense of community from where I grew up made me believe that it mattered, and it still matters to me now. In terms of the specifics of the question, the imperative for action is very, very clear. I want an opportunity for everyone is Labour's reason for existence. Addressing injustice is Labour's reason for existence. And it's not just morally right, it's sensible economics as well. It's win, win, win. It helps the individual, it helps society, and it helps the economy. That's the reason our party was founded, and it's what we're fighting for today. Tangibles I can advocate for include voicing the importance of acknowledging the work of the third sector, but also advocating for fair funding, better regulation, and transforming the economy, which is something that the TSI and Labour absolutely share a view on. Intangibles, I believe in collective campaigning. This is something I learned from my mum's work in the social housing estate that I grew up in, working together, all different organisations of state for the common problems. The last Labour government was proud of its record on poverty and inequality. Things have got worse recently, let's make no bones about that, but our mission will be to reduce inequality once again. That is the reason for existence for our party. There are plenty of tangible things we could do, ranging from funding to economic growth to reforming procurement and our green prosperity plan, all of which thinks about a fair society that brings everyone with it. Thanks very much for having me. Looking forward to the questions.
Thank you, Hamish. We now move on to the questions, which is questions that some of you have pre-submitted. Obviously, some of the issues that have been raised are reserved to the Scottish Government, but we'll ask them anyway, because we want our candidates to kind of think on their feet about how Westminster can help in some of the challenges that we address. But I do urge them to think about what specifically Westminster can do for some of the issues that you're raising. So, without further ado, could I ask Bree Smith from the Ard Chatton Centre to ask your question? And we've got a mic wending its way to you.
That's lovely. Thank you very much. The name is Bree Smith, and I led the buyout of the school in Bute, which is now called the Ard Chatton Centre. And that was through a Scottish Land Fund. My question to the panel, just to let you know that Bute is a small community. We're talking about 135 people. What is your strategy for ensuring that our rural and remote communities are properly resourced? Thank you.
Thanks, Breach, for that question. So just to reiterate the question again for the candidates, what is your strategy for ensuring that our remote rural communities are properly resourced? And I'm going to go in reverse order. So Hamish, you've got the short straw there. First up, please. And you've got 2 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a long straw. It's an important question, so I'm glad to have the chance to speak about it. Thanks very much for the question. So I want to be a voice for all of our towns and our rural communities. And when I was in the Navy, I spent time all across this constituency. I absolutely love our rural communities, and I've spent time across it as well during the campaign, listening to some of the issues that matter. And it is no secret that people are feeling left behind. They're feeling disconnected with politics in Holyrood, the Central Belt, and also Westminster. So I think there's a problem, first of all, with this idea of belief in politics. I think there's been far too much of parties putting themselves first, politicians putting themselves first, and not enough of the country being first as well, which is why 2/3 of people would say that they have lost faith in political parties after the last 20 years or so. So I think, first of all, just being mindful of the fact that we've got a lot of work to do to restore faith in politics. So Labour's overall view on the economy is one which needs to be fairer, cleaner, and bring everyone with us. So there's a number of things that are going to go on if we're lucky enough to win, which are in the categories of investment and reform, because you need both of those things. Now, I'm mindful of the fact that we're talking about, when it comes to health and education and transport, we are talking about devolved issues, but a Labour government would want to work with the Holyrood government, certainly better than the Conservatives have been doing. That as a broken relationship, and we would want to fix that. Labour has also set out where it would find for this election money to invest in the health service, to make health more of a frontline issue, not centralisation into big cities and their hospitals. So frontline with doctors, dentists and mental health. Likewise, education. We've set out in our Westminster budget, and we will do with our Holyrood budget, where we'd find money for more teachers, for more primary school nurseries, for breakfast clubs, and a modern curriculum. And this is about frontline resources, schools in our communities throughout our constituency. It's not about just investing in our big cities. Transport as well. It's no secret that people are feeling upset about ferries and about roads, and likewise the regularity of buses. Devolved, sure, but Labour in Westminster would think about investment, and we would work with the Holyrood government to make sure transport helps people in rural communities to engage with the economy. Thanks very much.
And can I ask Alan to answer the question, please?
Well, I want to, as I said in my introduction, I want to see much more power devolved down to local communities. I'm pleased that you were able to use the land reform legislation to buy the old school. It was, it was Liberal Democrats were part of the Scottish Government that introduced what was then very revolutionary land reform legislation, and that has been used by a lot of groups throughout rural Scotland in order to take control of land and property within their community. I think that the land reform agenda is very important. It seems to have stalled in recent years, and I would like to see the Scottish Government and Parliament taking forward the land reform legislation far more. I would like to see more money into the land fund to enable more communities to do what Bute did and buy land and property in their community. I mean, other issues are that we need to make sure that as technology develops, that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past that happened with electricity, with television, with broadband, that this was all rolled out into towns and cities and rural areas were left behind. The next technology coming down the line is gigabit broadband, and we have to make sure that that gets rolled out through the whole country at the same time so that rural communities aren't disadvantaged. Another technology coming down the line to combat global warming are electric cars, and we have to make sure that there are charging points everywhere in the country so that we don't have people frightened to take their electric car to Argyll in case they can't get it charged. There has to be confidence. The NHS as well has to be available everywhere. So although these issues are mostly devolved, I would support local communities in making sure that services are rolled out to the whole country.
I think in terms of resourcing, I think people that is our biggest resource. What we have, but more importantly, getting more people, because repopulation is the key to the survival of Argyll, Bute and South Lochaber. And I make no apology for talking about Brexit. I'll talk about Brexit tonight till the cows come home, and I'll talk about austerity until the cows come home, because they are inextricably linked. Brexit has been that disaster. Our health and social care services are crumbling because we cannot attract the people to come and work in that sector. We have an ageing population with increasingly complex needs, which we are not able to meet, primarily because of a lack of people, but also because of a lack of money. And we all know, people who live here, the scourge of rural poverty. And we know people who 5, 6, 7 years ago, it would have been unthinkable to see them accessing a food bank. But we see it day and daily. And the real tragedy is, and the disgrace is, that we are living in poverty amid plenty. There is an energy revolution on our doorstep. If you look at your National Grid app today, it'll tell you that 100% of the north of Scotland's electricity is being produced by wind power. We are producing more wind power than we know what to do with, and yet we have people living in abject poverty. On Islay, through its whisky, contributes about £200 million a year to the UK exchequer and receives almost zero in return. And that is what poverty amid plenty looks like, because we contribute far more than we do get back. And short of full independence, then we should be looking to devolve fully the devolution of tax powers to the Scottish Parliament, because there's no shortage of money in the UK. There's a shortage of political will to redistribute that money fairly.
So we're 5 minutes ahead of schedule. Do you want a follow-up question? Or do you want to make a comment, a brief comment?
I might just make a brief comment.
Trying to make it as interactive, as interesting as possible. That's true.
Just
very true.
Yeah, just a follow up on that, and it was more and was absolutely about resourcing small rural communities. And one area was mentioned was energy, and that is a matter that is dealt with through Westminster. Instead of giving us the crumbs on the cake, i.e., bits of handouts from the large wind turbines and about the oil companies, why can't we have a slice of the cake and give us actual turbines, give us ownership of these companies?
And there's a question on that a little bit later. So, yes. So you can prepare mentally on that one. I'm not going to allow the candidates to come back on that one. We'll go straight into our next question. So we have Tanya McDougall from the Family Mediation Centre. Tanya, do you want to ask your question?
Thank you. I'd like to ask, can you confirm your understanding of how the UK government's long-term austerity agenda impacts the third sector in Argyll and Bute? And how do you plan to assist in this changing if you are elected?
Thanks, Tanya. So the question again is, can you confirm your understanding of how the UK government's long-term austerity agenda impacts the third sector in Argyll and Bute, and how do you plan to assist in changing that if elected? So it's almost an expansion on the last point, really. So it gives you a chance to come back at the supplementary there. Brendan, if you want to take the first dibs.
I mean, again, let me repeat, austerity is a choice. Austerity didn't have to happen. Austerity was there to make basically to make the poor pay for the benefits of the rich. And people have become incredibly wealthy. Since 2010, when the austerity agenda was introduced by Cameron and Osborne, people have become poorer at the same time as people have become far, far richer. I was looking at a statistic today. In 2010, across the UK, 60,000 people relied on food banks. 60,000. In 2023, the most recent available figures, it was 3 million. 3 million people now rely on food banks. That doesn't happen by accident in the sixth richest country in the world. That happens by design. And the third sector, you're picking up the pieces. You are picking up the pieces for every decision that is made in Westminster which cuts funding to either the Scottish Government or to the local authorities, because their budgets are being slashed and your budgets are being slashed, and you're being asked to do so much more with so much less. And the more that you do, the more that Westminster stamps this miracles as standard. Your miracle workers, how you've managed to do what you've done with the resources that you're getting is absolutely remarkable. But rather than rewarding what you're doing, you're being punished for it by saying, if you can survive that, we'll salami slice a bit more off. If you can survive that, we'll salami slice a bit more off again. And that's what's happening. So the third sector and the voluntary sector and the charitable sector are relying more and more and more on the goodwill of individuals to pick up what should be a state responsibility. They are shrinking the state and they're making you pick up the pieces for it. And I have opposed austerity. Every day that I have been your MP, I have opposed austerity and I have called it out, and I will continue, if re-elected, to do that, because austerity is killing our communities and it's killing our people.
Alan, do you want to answer the next question? Thank you.
Well, the funding of the voluntary sector is devolved to the Scottish Government, and I think they should support the voluntary sector more. And I would, as your MP, I would be taking up cases of voluntary groups within the constituency, and would certainly support requests for more funding. A lot comes down to how well or how badly we run the economy. And in recent years, the economy has not been run well. I believe that it could be run much better. I think there's plenty of taxation money could be gathered from large companies. For example, we would reverse the Conservatives' cuts in banking taxation. We would triple the digital services tax. That's a tax that's paid by the large social media companies and the tech giants. We would introduce a windfall tax on the massive profits of the oil and gas companies. We would be taxing share-back schemes. We would have taxes on private flights. I think there's a lot of taxes that can be gathered in from the wealthy and from large companies. And of course, the UK government would be spending that money on public services in England, but through the Barnett formula, the Scottish Government would get its share, and I would hope that the Scottish Government would use some of that extra money to support the voluntary sector much more than it does at the moment.
So I'll start my answer with my personal perspective and experience of austerity. So it began in the council estate I grew up in, which was a Conservative-run council, and therefore before Cameron and Osborne, we were experiencing austerity. It just wasn't called that. It was just called Tory cuts. And that was really, really painful. There was crime in our street. It was dilapidated. There was a paedophile who basically went unobserved for a decade. There was a criminal gang. One guy went to prison for 20 years, and he tried to groom me and my friends into his enterprise. And it was only the strength of my mum and her friends that kept me and some of my friends safe. But I experienced that when I was young, and then when I was in the Royal Navy, I experienced austerity, as it came to be called, under Cameron and Osborne. Submarining is already difficult enough without having a reduced workforce who basically have pay cuts for a decade for doing very difficult and dangerous work. And that was just that part of it. It's the same across the whole system. It's important work and it's hard enough without feeling undervalued by the government who's supposed to support you. Right, so that has taught me, that's given me a sense of austerity and why I'm against austerity. It's also bad economics. Governments are supposed to invest and stimulate growth during downtimes, and when the economy grows and can better take care of itself, that's when the government can pull back a bit. Not the other way around, which is what the Conservatives have done. So we've had a slackening economy, underinvestment in public services, and so wages have been suppressed. So bad economics and bad morally. I agree that we do need to see the Scottish Government investing more of its budget into the third sector, given the importance of its work. I will campaign against austerity. Labour's view on this is the economy that we inherit, that will be the low watermark. We have a plan for investment from day one, and we set it out in our manifesto. It talks about taxing non-dom loopholes. It talks about taxing carried interest. It talks about windfall tax on oil and gas. More money from day one. There will also be reform as well to stimulate growth, and the reform will be in terms of planning, to make planning more effective, but it'll also be in terms of leadership. So the health service, for example, very, very top heavy. We need some of that money that's going to the executive, the C-suite, to go towards the frontline services. So there will be work done there to reorganise and reform. Ultimately, aiming to grow. So the Labour will invest, will reform, and we will work to grow the economy, because as I hope I've set out, we are anti-austerity, and it will be the low watermark that we will build upon. Thank you.
Lovely. Tanya, do you want to make a comment, or you can pass? And we can go straight on to the next question. Okay, thank you. Right, can I ask, we don't have Ailsa with us. Is Fiona in the audience? Oh, fantastic, great. So Fiona McEnroy, and you are also with Hope Kitchen, is that right?
No, actually, it's community wealth building. I'm asking this question.
Fine, go for it.
Okay. Wind energy in Scotland is a huge potential bounty. How do we make sure that Scottish people genuinely benefit in the wealth that's being created?
So I'll just repeat that part of the question. So it's wind energy in Scotland is a huge potential bounty. How do we make sure that Scottish people genuinely benefit in the wealth that's being created? I'm going to pair it with the questioner that's not here, which is specifically on community wealth building, so you can see why we paired it. So what is your commitment to community wealth building, recognising the value of contribution from the third sector and collective community-led solutions? And how will you support collective working at this time of increasing challenge, not division or polarisation, to best serve our communities? So two very linked questions there. And who would like to go first? Alan, yes, if you go first.
Yes, I mean, the premise of the question is correct. There is enormous potential for wind and indeed other forms of renewable energy, such as hydro and wave and tidal. That Scotland has enormous potential, and we have to make sure that the benefits come to local people and are not simply, all the profits don't simply go to the landowner or big multinational companies. And we should be I mean, the ideal is for the community to own its own renewable generation plant. And I think that the Scottish Government needs to put much more effort into encouraging communities to build and operate their own renewable energy plants. Clearly that will need a lot of professional backup. I mean, obviously, unless we're a renewable energy professional, we don't have the first idea of how you start. So I think it needs a lot of professional backing from the Scottish Government so that communities can own their renewable generation plants. And even and in cases where the community doesn't want to do that, I still think that the community benefit schemes that we get from renewable energy sources are nothing like what they should be. I would like to see that when planning applications are granted for renewable energy plants, that the conditions that's inserted into the planning application is far, far more money for the local community, and that the money goes to local community groups who can then invest it in their community. So I think to sum up, much more ownership, much more professional advice from the Scottish Government, and let's get the money into the local communities.
I'll deal with, if I may, the community wealth building first, just because it's far more straightforward. Absolutely, yes. I think community wealth building it has to be welcomed, and I'm really pleased that the Scottish Government have adopted that, and I've seen that as well. It can and should deliver better jobs, allow more community-owned assets, look towards shorter supply chains and greater resilience in achieving our net zero ambitions. So that's tick, 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 as far as I'm concerned, for community wealth building. On the wider point about fuel, I think we've got to ask ourselves why, in an area like this, we have this poverty amid plenty. And basically, it's down to the fact that we may have all the energy, but we've got none of the power. And that's the problem. The power companies are making, and we have a privatised grid who's being fed by private companies, and they take the wealth and they decide what happens to that wealth. We watch the energy, the turbines go up. We watch as they extend Cruachan. We create so much and we get nothing back. And I will always revert back to independence. I think we have to be independent in order to harness that potential. But until we are, then there are practical things that I have tried to do along with my colleague Drew Hendry. And we met with Ofgem just about a month before Parliament dissolved. We met with the Energy Minister to make these points, that we are creating this energy, but we are getting zero in return for it. In fact, we are negative because we are paying the highest standing charges for it. Our energy bills are stratospheric because of the poor quality, historic poor quality build of our housing and our lack of insulation and managing to keep that heat in. So we are paying through the nose for what is passing our front door every single day. And we have raised it with Ofgem, we've raised it with the Energy Minister, and it was the idea that there should be a rebate for those areas of the country which make the energy, which produce the energy. We seem to be getting somewhere along the line when Mr Sunak decided he was going to cut and run. But I can assure you that until we have the powers of an independent country, it's something that I will continue to advocate for on your behalf, along with Drew Hendry, when hopefully we both get back on July the 4th.
Okay, so I'm excited to make the case here that we don't need independence to solve this. I think Labour has got a really, really good argument to make here. So set the scene, first of all, acknowledging that the climate is changing in a way that can have disastrous consequences that will make everything else seem insignificant if we don't get a grip of it. But also, fuel poverty is a problem across the whole country, but our coastal and island communities do feel it especially bad. Being so dislocated from energy supplies, but also inefficient homes when it comes to heating, which is why over a third of our residents are in fuel poverty. As we go through the energy transition that we have to go through, this is vital for the whole planet, it needs to benefit the place of energy production. That means people in this room and in this constituency. It's worth reiterating why this is a great place for renewables in terms of great wind, hydro and wave, forests, communities from which to base the work, young people who could be tomorrow's experts in green energy power. So Argyll and Bute, South Dakota, can become a centre for excellence for climate solutions. But we all agree it's not fair that power produced here goes back into the grid and gets sold back to you at a premium. That is not right. If you are the site of production, you ought to benefit from it. And Labour has set out a local power plan, which is there for you to read in our manifesto. I think it's really exciting. First of all, we're going to set up a publicly owned company whose job it will be to coordinate our supply chain before China hoovers it all up, and also our distribution. We're going to launch a major program of renewable power, which is going to reduce emissions, it's going to cut bills, and it's going to grow wages. That's why I find this so exciting. It'll be collaboration between energy companies, local authorities, and communities, and this is the important point that gets to that aspect of the question. It will create thousands of jobs, and it will invest in community-owned projects. £600 million for local authorities and £400 million a year in low-interest loans for communities to set up their own projects. And just to be very, very clear, of the larger projects, the larger wind, hydro and wave, if you are the site of production, you need to benefit from it economically. Now, the most simple version of that can be a reduction in your bills. That is fair. But there also needs to be a debate, a consultation on if that is the right form of benefit for you, or if communities would like to see it come in other forms, such as reinvestment. But Labour is very, very clear. You need to benefit from this revolution. Thank you.
Thanks to the panel for those responses. And Fiona, do you want to add anything or make a comment? You're absolutely fine to pass. That means we can take some more questions at the end. So that means we'll get more than 6 questions, which is always good. So question 4, Katrina from Hope Kitchen. Do you want to ask your question to the panel, please?
Thank you, Jake. Okay, I'm Katrina Petit and I'm from Hope Kitchen. My question is about Brexit. So Brexit has had a negative impact on our economy in Argyll and Bute and has an impact on our poverty levels. How would each party work towards a closer relationship with Europe going forward?
So big question here. I'll just repeat it again. Brexit has had a negative impact on our economy in Argyll and Bute and impacted on poverty levels. How would each party work towards a closer relationship with Europe? Hamish, do you want to go first on this one? And then Alan.
Okay, so I'll make no secret of the fact that I voted to remain in the European Union. That was my view, and I vocalised that case strongly. And I was disappointed with the outcome of that referendum. Over the last few years, as I've become increasingly involved with politics, and the reason I've become involved with politics is because I have recognised that a country which I am very, very proud of, I volunteered to defend it with my life if necessary, has been having a really, really hard time recently. It's been led badly, I think, by our 2 governments, and there are loads and loads of different aspects of that. Now, going into it, I wondered what we'd discover in terms of the list of priorities of people that we'd be canvassing and speaking to across Scotland and across the UK. Now, what has been instructive to us in the policy we've set out in our manifesto is that constitutional matters have fallen much, much further down people's immediate priorities. That's not to say longer-term priorities, but they have absolutely, from what we've been hearing, gone down the list of priorities. As a result of that, the Labour Party has set out that it will not set to reverse that referendum, certainly not in this Parliament. What the party will do, however, is work to reset the relationship with the European Union, which I think can be much, much better than it is right now. One of the most embarrassing things I felt on behalf of my country was a couple of years ago when the Foreign Secretary was asked, France, friend or foe, and her answer was, we'll see. I was utterly appalled by that. It's so humiliating the way that the Conservatives have tarnished our reputation overseas and with the European Union. And the Conservatives' approach to Brexit has been as chaotic as has been the management of their own party. They've basically been focused on infighting, they've been inward-looking, and I think nobody is satisfied with the state of the relationship we have with the European Union. So Labour has made it very clear that when the renegotiations of the Brexit deal come up in 2025, we will go into that to collaborate, not to combat. Our aim will be to reduce and remove, trade barriers with the EU, which we think can be mutually beneficial. There are countries in the European Union which are also crying out for a reduction in the trade barriers which have been set up, making it easier for business to export and import goods. Other aspects of that will include veterinary agreements for our farming, but also our arts and culture, helping musicians, for example, go to the continent. So much was done so badly in the deal that the Conservatives negotiated. We also have a clear policy on immigration overall. It's no secret, again, that the Tories have not been very good at this. So we've got a policy which is designed at skills, changing the points-based system, and setting up a new border command to look at this holistically. And I think that can benefit our constituency because there is a population issue. Thank you very much.
Yes, like Hamish, I voted and campaigned for Britain to remain within the EU, and I was extremely disappointed by the outcome. And it's Liberal Democrats' long-term aim to go back into the EU, but that has to be a long-term project, and it's not something that is on the agenda for the Parliament that's just about to start. Because the first problem that we have to fix is Britain's broken relationship with the EU countries. I mean, they're quite simply fed up with us. When we were in the EU, we were causing so many problems for them, and then we caused a major problem by coming out, and they, like us, had to spend a very long time renegotiating trade deals. And so they're not, we have to face the facts that we have to prepare the ground, because if we just turn up and ask to rejoin, they're not going to welcome us with open arms. So the first step is by declaring a fundamental change in the UK's position that we want to work with the EU rather than working against it. And the first step that we could do that would be working together with them on foreign policy. That would give Britain much more influence in the world. We also, next step would be to join various EU agencies, programs such as the European Aviation Safety Agency, Erasmus, scientific programs, climate and environmental initiatives, and to cooperate on defence, security and crime. Then move to deepening the trade relationship, including negotiating comprehensive agreements on things like veterinary and plant health and mutual recognition agreements. And the next step after that would be to replace the relationship on a much more formal and stable footing by rejoining the single market. All those measures will help to restore the British economy to prosperity and also give our citizens opportunities that are denied to them at the moment. And I think these are essential steps towards rejoining the EU, which we will not achieve in the current Parliament, but that's certainly the long-term aim.
Where I would agree with Hamish was when he said we need to reset the relationship with the EU. We need to reset that relationship by joining the EU as quickly as we possibly can. Brexit has been an unmitigated disaster. We said it would. Scotland believed that it would, and Scotland voted 62% to remain in the European Union. And yet today, Scotland is the only part of the United Kingdom which hasn't got what it voted for. England and Wales voted to leave. They've left. Northern Ireland voted to remain. They're in the single market and the customs union. Scotland voted, every single local authority in Scotland voted to remain, and yet we are out. And we are not just on the periphery of Europe, we're on the periphery of the United Kingdom, and it is a disaster. And let me quote from Labour's manifesto. It says, with Labour, Britain would stay out of the EU. There will be no return to the single market, the customs union, or freedom of movement. And that means because of decisions taken elsewhere, you will get poorer. Your children will be poorer. Your grandchildren will be poorer. And for your children and your grandchildren, the world is going to be an awful lot smaller in this isolated, insular island on which we live. And that's why we need to get back to full membership of the European Union as quickly as possible. And that's why we can't economically, socially, or culturally afford to wait for other people on these islands to take us back in. That's why we've got to stand up now and say, if we want Scotland to be a better place, a fairer place, a more prosperous place, a more outward-looking place, then that has to be as an independent member of the European Union. There is no alternative to it, because if we don't do that, then that's the future. The future will be outside of the customs union, the single market, no freedom of movement, and economic decline, accelerated economic decline.
Thanks to the panel for that. Katrina, do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that I was a little bit disappointed, Hamish, from the fact that you said that constitutional matters are lower on people's kind of level of interest. But I think the thing is, I think as a politician or potential politician, you need to lead the way in supporting people to be able to understand the fact that people don't want to get poorer. And I think the thing is that being afraid of saying we want to at least rejoin the single market and the customs union at the and just stopping that outright means actually I feel like you're dancing to the Tories' tune instead of saying, look, we're going to set this agenda, because for my children who are in their 20s, they don't have the opportunities I had to go and explore Europe and go and work in Europe and do things like that. And, people maybe didn't know what they were voting for, and now it's very apparent what people voted for. And as the United Kingdom, I think we need to be able to go back into some part of the customs union and the single market at the very least.
I think because a candidate was named, I'm going to ask the panel if they want to take an opportunity to speak for 1 minute on this. If you want to, you can, or you can. And the other candidates, do you want to come back for a minute each on that? It's up to you. You don't have to.
In part, the reason I'd like to respond is, first of all, just to respect you and your opinion and acknowledge that that is a view that others do share with you. So what I'm not offering is an exclusive picture that the whole country rejects the notion we should revisit constitutional issues. What I have discovered through the process, though, of canvassing and campaigning is when I look at the range of challenges that we face as a country, which are enormous, there is a list of priorities which aren't just a popular matter, but when you examine them carefully, as I have, I've reached the opinion that there is a list of priorities that we need to address. I believe that we do have the opportunity to grow our economy alongside working with the European Union, but not rejoining it in the near term. That is my belief. I believe we can reform our economy in the near term without joining the EU immediately. And I think we can make devolution work better. There is a dysfunctional relationship between London and Holyrood. Neither parties in those two governments make any bones of that. I think we can show that devolution can work much better. Doesn't mean we won't revisit it ever, but I think it's a sensible list of priorities that we grapple the economy and public services now, and that's my view. But thank you for your question.
I go back to the point I made earlier on, that outside of the European Union, you can't grow the economy. You can't grow the economy remotely quick enough that it's going to come good for you or your kids, or I would venture your grandchildren. And it's like, I sometimes think of Keir Starmer like King Canute, when Richie Sunak is trying to hold back the tide, saying, no, hold on, not you're off your head, you can't do it. It's like, hold on, give me a go. I know how to do it. You can't do it. You simply cannot make Brexit work. And the sooner you come to that conclusion and the realisation that we either, the UK goes back in or Scotland goes its own way and goes back in, that's what it is. And the priority, talk about priorities. There seems to be an endless supply of money for nuclear weapons, but there seems to be precious little money to keep children out of poverty. And if that is the future of a United Kingdom, then it's a future that I want to be out of.
Yes, I would repeat that our aim is we want to rejoin the EU, but we have to face up to the fact that it is a long, slow process. The EU does not do things quickly. For example, I don't know exactly when the British Cabinet first decided that it wanted to join the EU, but I think it was sometime in the early 60s, and it was over 10 years before we actually joined. So it is a slow process, and I think that the gradual approach of doing a bit at a time, joining in with European agencies, then joining the single market and the customs union, and finally rejoining the EU itself. I think that's the right approach to go one step at a time. Rather, I just think it's not believable to think we can just a government gets elected one day and the next day the Prime Minister's off to Brussels and signed a deal. It's not going to work that way. It's one step at a time and we'll get there.
Thanks, everybody, for your responses and for the supplementary. Right, can I ask, is Kenny Gray in the audience? I don't think he is. Is Norman Martin in the audience? Fantastic, that's great. So these were two questions combined. We'll do what we did with the community wealth building one. So Norman, do you want to ask your question on personal care? And I think I'll ask Alan to answer it first, and I will add the question on, it's a general question on NHS funding. So we're going to try and shoehorn personal care and NHS funding into one response, if I may. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hello there, Norman Martin, retired Merchant Navy, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Nautilus Welfare Fund, which operates down in Wallasey, a facility called Mariners Park, which is for all seafarers, Hamish will be glad to know, fishermen, Merchant Navy and Royal Navy. They operate a care home of 32 beds, as well as about 180 housing units. And that's given me an insight into the caring industry. Locally, we have a crisis where we just don't have the people willing to be social carers. It comes back to freedom of movement, and of course, there's funding as well, which comes back to Brexit again. I wonder if you can see a way out of the difficulties that we have in this area. I know for a fact, through experience of a friend, he was in hospital here, and the doctors were spending a huge amount of their time attempting to arrange care packages so that they could discharge patients who they could do no more for in the hospital, needed to be moved out into the community, and that was just silly. They were the medical people running around in circles, as I say, trying to sew together care packages. Thank you.
Thanks, Norman. So that's a question around the funding and the provision and the workforce around social care. And if I could ask the panel to consider how we might tie that in with an integrated approach in our healthcare system, such that we might invest in preventative and early intervention services so that we don't need so much hospital care in the first place. But how you choose to answer it is up to you. So Alan, do you want to take this one first?
All right. Well, if I tackle the funding first, I mean, I touched on this in earlier on. There's that we want to we think that there is a source of taxation that has not been tapped by the present government, and that is taxing big companies. I won't read out the list again that I read out earlier, but I gave examples of where we could extract more money from big companies. I think there's also scope for greater resources in HMRC, because there's plenty of money that can be got, first of all, by clamping down on illegal tax evasion schemes, and also by rule changes, we can clamp down on a lot of what are currently legal tax avoidance schemes. So I think there is plenty of scope from extracting more taxation income from big companies and from the wealthy. Now, our plan is to put most of that into the health and social care sector. That would be in England, because that's where the UK government is responsible. But of course, the Scottish Parliament would get its Barnett share and would be able to spend it how it wished. But I think it would follow the UK government and spend it on the health and social care sector. Norman, you made a good point about the difficulties of recruiting staff. I think there's various ways to tackle that. One is that we would increase the minimum wage for social care staff, because at the moment I think it is much more attractive to people to work for various private sector companies and earning the same money as they would working in social care. But I think if we increase the minimum wage for the social care sector, that would attract a lot more people from the private sector to work in social care. We also need to change our immigration rules and to make it more attractive for people who are qualified in health and social care to come to work in Britain. We would reduce the fees that have to be paid for work visas for the health and social care sector, and we would allow people we give work visas to people who had the necessary skills where there was a shortage in this country. So I think with all those factors, I think we could go a long way to solving the problems that you've identified.
So I think the way I think about it is to begin by recognising the nature of the problem. Why is more money going into the NHS and it underperforming? And there is definitely a very clear trend of greater inflation in pharmaceuticals and biotechnology than there is in other sectors. So those technologies are getting more and more expensive, is one issue. And another issue is that the NHS, by being successful in its job of keeping people alive for longer, for growing the average life expectancy, we have an older population. So we need to think more about care. And unfortunately, those two things have not been put together. So we've been putting more money into an NHS which is inefficient. It's very, very top heavy. It's excessively centralised, and it's not using anywhere near enough technology to improve the output. So the first part of the problem then, in terms of how we're going to fund NHS broadly, but also care, is to, and you can see this again in the back of our manifesto, I would encourage you to have a look at it if you haven't yet. A lot of effort's gone into explaining how carefully costed this has been. So non-dom taxes, carried interest taxes, windfall taxes on oil and gas, you're looking at about £7.5 billion. So it's a lot of money. You want it to be more, but that's what we're starting with. About 5 billion of that's going towards the NHS. So it's going to be increasing appointments. It's going to be putting more into the front line in terms of GPs, dentists, and care as well. So that, I think, is going to be important. There is going to be a really rigorous examination of how the money is spent in the NHS, because it is very, very top heavy. That is a well-known problem. We need more of the money to go from the top towards delivery of the frontline services. I am really excited about better use of technology. In many ways, the NHS is very backward-looking. Lots is still done on paper. We're not using communication services enough. Thank you. I also think the UK has got an incredibly exciting biotechnology sector of early-stage companies that are doing things that can change the world in terms of diagnosis, in terms of prevention, and in terms of treatment. And I think if that's properly invested in, which it hasn't, it's been underinvested, that can also be a really interesting solution. And then if I zoom in a bit onto the specifics on how we deliver, how care is delivered, I think there's a number of different policies you can think about, such as respite for non-paid carers, and also an increase in pay, basic pay for care professionals, absolutely in our agenda, in our manifesto. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman. I think that I'll start with the social care issue because it's pressing. There's probably none of us in this room haven't had to rely on social care at some point. We need people. I go back, all roads lead back to Brexit and the need for people. We need people to come here. And yes, it would be great to increase people's wages, but all you'd be doing is you'd just be shuffling the pack and you'd be taking people out of another sector. We need people to come here and live here and work here and raise families here and repopulate this constituency. But what we have the right wing have hijacked this entire debate, and need doesn't matter anymore. It's all about numbers. It's all about stopping immigration, about cutting both legal and illegal immigration. That flies in the face of A, common sense, and B, basic humanity. But if that's a route that the United Kingdom wants to go down, then why not devolve immigration policy to the Scottish Parliament? So the Scottish Parliament can decide how it attracts the numbers and the workforce that it requires for our needs. And moving on, Taki, you talked about preventative medicine. Absolutely. But the biggest preventative medicine you could have is to break the link between poverty and ill health. Poverty in children leads to ill adults. And I would ask you to look at the Scottish Child Payment. £25 for every single child under 16 is eligible to claim, with, I'm very pleased to say, no limits on the number of children. The Scottish Child Payment has been absolutely transformational. Currently, 316,000 children in Scotland receive it. And if that was to be spread out across the UK, it would only cost £4.2 billion. Break the link between poverty and ill health for £4.2 million. And I'll finish with a quote from Professor Danny Dorling, who described the Scottish Child Payment as the single policy intervention that has created the largest fall in child poverty anywhere in Europe for at least 40 years. It's about political will and political priorities. And that's what tonight is about, your political priorities and who reflects them best. And you want to break that link between child poverty and ill health, then you give a big thumbs up to what the Scottish Government is doing.
Okay, thank you again to the panel and to the questioner. Question 6 is from Susan Simpson from Anam Cara Fazga Charity. Susan, if you want to ask a question when the microphone gets to you. And I'm just wondering who wants to start next. I think, Brendan, it might be you first. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Our charity supports families bereaved through the death of a baby child or young person. And some of the families that come to us have experienced the death of a baby, either through miscarriage, stillbirth, or neonatal death. Parents who experience a stillbirth after 24 weeks of pregnancy are entitled to their 2 weeks of leave and pay, and they're also entitled to maternity leave if they're the mother, and paternity leave if they're the father. They can take up to 12 months of maternity leave if they're the mother. Parents who experience the death of a baby before 24 weeks are only entitled to 2 weeks. They grieve the loss of their baby just as much as someone who lost their baby at 24 weeks. Will the panel pledge to revise maternity leave to include parents who lose a baby before 24 weeks gestation, thus supporting thousands of bereaved families throughout the UK?
So, if I'm not mistaken, the employment law is a reserved matter to the UK government, so very appropriate for our candidates before us, as is also the DWP in terms of benefits. So I'll repeat the end of the question. Will the panel pledge to revise maternity leave to include parents who lose a baby before 24 weeks gestation, thus supporting thousands of bereaved parents? And Brendan, if you want to go first, and then Alan.
Thank you, Susan. And you know that we've been in contact so many times over the last 9 years, and I just want to pay my personal tribute to your charity and the work that you and your family do. It's absolutely wonderful, and it's still one of my favourite in fact, one of the few photographs I actually have of myself in the house is the photograph that was taken by the maestro behind you at your charity day, when that butterfly landed on my pinky and stayed there for ages and ages. And so I know what you do, I appreciate what you do, and I pay tribute to what you do. I'm not going to stand here and say that I'm going to solve your problems. I'm not going to promise you anything which I can't deliver on. We know each other well enough. But what I will promise to do, Susan, if I'm back, if I get back, then let's meet up, let's go for that coffee, and let's talk about this and work out a way to do it. Because I think it's fine for us to sit here and say, yes, I think it's a great idea, let's do it. But we'll look at the practical problems, or the practical hurdles that we're going to encounter, understand why the rule is the rule at the moment, and why it might be difficult to get it changed. Now, I don't know, but my promise to you is that when this is all over, we'll sit down, we'll have that coffee, and we'll look at it.
Yes, I mean, it's clearly a very traumatic experience to lose a baby at any point. I don't know why in the 24 weeks seems to be an arbitrary limit. I don't know why that is the rule. There's nothing in our manifesto that for changing this, for changing the number of weeks. So it's not something that I can make any commitment to today. But again, I would just really repeat what the offer that Brendan made, that I would, if I'm successful in the election, I would like to meet with you and discuss the matter and use the knowledge that you have to then approach the DWP and discuss from their point of view why they believe the rule is at 24 weeks, and see what can be done. So, but yeah, I can't make any commitment beyond that, but I certainly commit to do that.
Well, first of all, well done on the work you do. That is a really difficult and important job that you support people with. It strikes me that love and pain don't recognise arbitrary boundaries in time. So I can't conceive of a ethical or moral reason why 24 weeks would be an appropriate distinction. Without any special insight, my sense would be that as with any aspect of funding, this was an economic one, but that feels really, really painful and harsh. I would want to, first of all, I agree that I'd like to have a conversation with you, but I would, if elected, want to examine the rationale. So I'd come to a conversation with you better armed to articulate whatever has gone on so far. But what I want to do when I speak with you is give a sense that I recognise, I understand where you're coming from with the question, why that is so difficult. That does upset me. That does get to me. And you'd have an ally in working that through. Again, well done though. Really, really amazing work.
So Susan, you've gained 3 new allies. Well done. Do you want to ask? Oh, very good, very good, very good. two new ones. There you go. Do you want to ask, make a comment in general, or just for a minute or so?
Yeah, so I just want to thank you for your pledges. That really, really means a lot to us and will mean a lot to the families that we support. And I think when you're talking about, we were talking earlier about the NHS and about mental health support and that kind of thing, I think we need to realise that it's really important to support bereaved families, whether it's a baby, child or young person, with their mental health, with their grief. And I think there's so much more we can be doing as a society and as governments to do that. So thank you.
Thanks, Susan, for that. Right, so we've been very good and we've cantered through our questions, which has given you an opportunity. Can I then move on to question 7? I think we've got David Duncan in the room. And David was going to ask a question about Gaza.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's quite apt to follow on from Susan Simpson's question there, because so many constituents in Argyll and Bute have had to face the horror of child loss, and many have been re-traumatised. I'll go so far as saying by the horrors of the sheer level of slaughter that's happening in Gaza. The mask has slipped. Those of us who have been up to date with the situation in Palestine know it's been going on a long, long time. And there have been war crimes across the West Bank and Gaza going on for an extremely long time. At this moment, with massive public support, growing public understanding of the war crimes that are happening, it's quite terrifying to see politicians minimise this. Some have been sacked, from their positions, etc. For those who've been calling out the horrors. I want to ask, on behalf of those of us campaigning in various organisations in Argyll and Bute, what you can do to acknowledge that, in fact, the truth that we all know, which is that there are horrendous war crimes happening in the West Bank, in Palestine, and in Gaza at the moment. So I just want to know, to what level can you acknowledge these horrendous war crimes, and particularly in light of the revelations that's been involvement by British, SES and so on, armed forces, to what extent can you reassure us that our tax money won't be involved in these horrendous war crimes? Thanks.
So your party's policies on Gaza, please.
Okay, thank you for the question. Yes, I mean, what is happening in Gaza is absolutely appalling, as was what happened in Israel when Hamas attacked Israel back last October. Israel did have the right to self-defense. It did have the right to take steps to try to release the hostages, but it has gone far too far. I mean, there is absolutely no excuse whatsoever for the war crimes that Israel has clearly committed in Gaza. I mean, the UK still a powerful voice in the world, and Liberal Democrat manifesto is that we would use that voice to advocate for an immediate bilateral ceasefire to resolve the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza and get the hostages released and provide the environment to attempt to negotiate a two-state solution based on the 1967 borders with security and dignity for both Israelis and Palestinians. We would also introduce a presumption of denial for granting arms exports to governments which have committed human rights abuses. And clearly that would include Israel, because there's absolutely no doubt that Israel has committed horrendous human rights abuses in Gaza. So to sum up, Israel did have the right to defend itself. Hamas is a terrorist organization and committed terrible crimes. They had the right to defend themselves. They had the right to release the hostages, but they do not have the right to commit the horrendous war crimes. So we would, Liberal Democrats in government would be making that perfectly clear. We would argue for an immediate bilateral ceasefire, and we would stop issuing licenses for arms exports to Israel.
Thanks, David. What I would do on day one is continue what I was doing the day that Parliament dissolved, and that was demanding an immediate ceasefire, demanding the immediate restoration of funding to UNRWA, calling out Netanyahu as a war criminal and supporting the ICJ and the ICC, I'd be calling out for an immediate end to the sale of arms to Israel and moves towards a two-state solution. And we should be in no doubt that the UK government know what is going on. They are complicit in war crimes. They are up to their neck in it. And they are denying the evidence of their own eyes, and they have done since very, very shortly after the appalling attacks on October the 7th. But much wider than that, if we accept Israel's actions as being in any way justified or justifiable, or we are able to condone them, then we are setting the world on a very, very dangerous path. The world relies on a rules-based order, and it relies on states to police states. And if we turn a blind eye to the war crimes of Netanyahu and his cronies because it's inconvenient not to, then what do we do the next time someone who we don't like so much or we're not so friendly with or who doesn't buy our weapons decides that they're going to do something similar, and they point to what's happening in Gaza and say, you did nothing then, why are you trying to do something now? The UK's decision to ignore the evidence of its own eyes is a disaster for the rest of the world. But more immediately, in Gaza, just before I left, I asked the Deputy Foreign Secretary, I said, why in an area of the world where there is no food shortage, 44 miles from Tel Aviv, why are children dying of starvation? And he said, and I'll never forget it, he said, because of October the 7th. So October the 7th, as far as the UK government is concerned, gives Israel the right to use starvation as a weapon of war. It gives Israel the right to turn the water off, and it gives Israel the right to blanket bomb civilians. And they're doing it in our name. Well, we've got to join with those tens of millions of people across these islands and say to them and any incoming government who thinks they can do the same, they're not doing it in our name.
I mentioned I studied law at university. What I didn't specify was I ended up focusing on international law and international humanitarian law, and I have a really, really strong belief that the solution to conflict and war is a proper, strong, well-run international legal system. Right, so that's my vision of, that's my aspiration, that's what I believe in, okay? I'm also really proud of the fact that the UK helped to draft the existing laws on armed conflict and on human rights laws, okay? So that I think is a really, really good thing that the UK was a cornerstone in. What has happened more recently is we've lost our way and we are not exerting enough strong leadership in international law as we had done for decades and decades. And that, I think, is the fault of the current government. It is inward-looking, it is chaotic, it is not doing the job that we expect, and I think the UK can do in future. All right, so that's my perspective. In the context of the conflict that's now happening in the Middle East, the people of Israel and Palestine deserve peace, security, and freedom. And the scenes of death we've seen since 7th October, every day since, have broken our heart. Okay, so I feel what you feel on this. Right, this is a very human, very painful issue. We need the violence to stop right now. I would call for a ceasefire right now. Longer term, I do advocate a two-state solution. I don't believe that it is the gift of Palestine's neighbour to grant that. I think the people of Palestine and Israel deserve the sovereignty and security over their own countries. I think we do need to condemn Hamas's attack on the 7th, but we also need to separate Hamas from the Palestinians, just like we need to separate Netanyahu and his right-wing government from the people of Israel. Okay, so both of those peoples deserve peace, deserve security, and we need to focus on the leadership when it comes to these offences. There has to be accountability in armed conflict. There absolutely must be. In terms of the ICJ and the ICC's ability to do something about this. I've been paying close attention to it too, and as far as I understand, the UN is talking about there's these 6 emblematic bombings, but emblematic is the key word, I think. What they're talking about there is they're emblematic of a wider issue. I think that process has to be given the resources and time to do its job, and we ought not stand in its way. In terms of arms sales, Labour is very clear that the UK must not export weapons to a country that is carrying out war crimes. And I believe that, and I would agree with that. And I think we should stop exporting arms, given what we've learned. Thank you very much for your question.
Thanks to the questioner. OK, let's do that. I mean, that means we won't have a final question, but let's... OK, go on then.
Just take about 10 seconds. Just to say, look, it looks very much like we're looking for a Labour government, and I just want to say, if that's the case, that I hope that there's a reminder from Iraq at the lack of respect of human rights, which has been going on for a long time as well. So please, keep a reminder. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Brilliant. Now, we've got literally 4 minutes left, so I'm going to propose if someone's got a nice, juicy, very quick question. I don't think I can ignore Helen. You did submit it. You did submit it.
Yeah. Well, I'm representing Developing Potential, which is one of the things that we do is we run a peer-led mental health support group. And what's a major issue for us and is the PIP and the changes that Mr. Sunak's come up and said we should get vouchers and shopping catalogues and everything to instead of getting the money if you have mental health and you're on the PIP. PIP is, I know in Scotland it's all mostly moved over now, but people who are on a long term without an end date, like myself, are still on PIP. So it's just really adding much more stress and anxiety to people who are already vulnerable. They say there's not that it's not strict enough. Well, I think that's people who have never been to these assessments or tribunals. It's absolutely disgusting. They've already been treated. So I want to know what you're going to do with it when you go back.
And just for everybody's convenience, PIP, and correct me if I'm wrong, Helen, it's personal independence payments. So the question that you submitted, Helen, was what are the candidates' views on the proposals to replace personal independence payments with vouchers for many claimants with mental health issues? So who would like to go first? I'm looking at Brendan. Go on then, Brendan. And if I can ask for 2 minutes?
2 minutes, absolutely. Well, I doubt I'll take 2 minutes. Helen, 100% support you. I absolutely do. You know, and you've recognised that PIP has moved over to the adult disability payment by the Scottish Government, and the Scottish Government have made it absolutely clear they will not be going down the road of vouchers. I think this is an issue of human rights, it's an issue of respect, and it's an issue of why would a government treat the most vulnerable group in society in this way? It feels almost like a punishment, and it's I would say ill thought out, but so much of what they do is ill thought out. I would actually come down and say it feels utterly vindictive, and you can rest assured, as you know, as we've talked about many times, if I get back in, I will continue to advocate on you and your clients' behalf as well. Absolutely, I will.
Well, this has now devolved to the Scottish Government and Parliament.
Not for all Scottish people, it isn't.
The power is devolved. The power is 100% devolved. Now, the power is 100% devolved. It's entirely up to the Scottish Government how this is progressed. I'm pleased to hear from Brendan that the Scottish Government are not going down the voucher route. It is a completely stupid, illogical, unfair route to go down. It's quite clear that the present government are not going to get re-elected. We don't know what type of government we've got, but it certainly won't be this government. So I hope the whole idea is completely dead. But if I'm elected as your MP and there are any people being forced down the voucher route, then don't worry, I will argue their case. But from what I've heard from Brendan and from what I predict the election result to be, I would hope that this is a scheme that's absolutely dead.
Yeah, I mean, if elected, I would be 100% in your corner on this. I mean, it strikes me as, the idea of the voucher strikes me as at once dehumanizing, but also economically unsound. I remember 20 years ago, I watched a film in America where a voucher system was referred to, and I thought, goodness me, I'm so glad we don't have that sort of thing in this country, dehumanizing and economically unsound. The dehumanizing aspect, I think, as it says, is government knows better what you need. We're going to set the terms, and you're going to sit within those terms. Whereas I think what's much more important is individuals have the right to spend the money on what they need, because nobody understands your needs better than you. But the economic aspect, I think, is absolutely baffling because, you know, if only we had developed a system where people could use a medium to exchange for goods and services. Oh, what we have, it's called money. We don't need to reinvent this wheel. It is perfectly effective. My guess is there's two things at play here. It's either a combination of economics or perhaps much more cynical. I fear that given some of the policies of Rishi Sunak's government, that this is more an ethical issue of trust and looking down their noses at people who need support from the state. So 100%, I'm absolutely with you on this, and I would be from day one if elected.
So everybody, that brings our hustings to a close. Thank you ever so much for giving up a nice warm evening to come and talk politics. Politics is what makes the world go round. It makes our lives better. Ultimately, it can do. I'm an absolute optimist. And a massive thank you to our three candidates who've given up their time. I know it's hard sometimes to be a politician, not always thanked, but they've given us their time, they've given us their thoughts, and if you could all give your thanks as well. Thank you. And thanks to everyone online as well.
I'm so proud to be Scottish because I think we're safe, but that doesn't mean to say that it's not going to happen in England to a lot of vulnerable people. So whoever is elected, please, please, please bear that in mind.